reading a story in Time, and I thought to myself, what a great quote. So we talked so much about scams and frauds, and we've had people on, of course, who've been through them, and we've had people on, experts suggesting what you should do, what you should know to avoid being part of a scam. And then to read this article, which has a title of "We Are in the Golden Age of Scams," and think to yourself, you know what, as crazy as that is, it's true. There's more of this happening now than has ever happened before. And sadly, perhaps, is the fact, I think, as well, that I don't know that we're going to get any better at dealing with this, despite the fact we seem to know more, and there are more people that this is happening to, but that hasn't resulted in any kind of a definitive answer to how do we stop them to begin with. So, to that point, Alana Semuels is an economic correspondent for Time Magazine, and she's on the line. Alana, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Can I, first of all, I think for people to understand, as I said, we talk about these things on a fairly regular basis, so it's not a surprise, although every time you hear someone being scammed, you hope to think, I hope people learn from this particular event so that if and when it happens to them, or when it is, about to happen to them, they don't fall into that same trap. It turns out that doesn't happen very often, does it?
No, it's really hard to avoid this. Even people who think this could never happen to me, it happens too. And I think, one thing I learned when reporting this is it's not a good idea to blame people who fall victim to this because, they're victims of a crime.
Yeah, and we also know, and based on this, this is in your piece as well, the numbers, and I'll ask you to just say, because I kind of lost it when I saw, the idea is that now U.S. consumers lost how much to fraud in 2023?
I believe it was about 1.1 billion, which is higher than ever and about 3 times what they lost in 2020.
Okay, so it continues to get worse. We don't know what to do. You highlight a couple of stories in your particular stories, rather, in your article about people, and I found this one fascinating. A woman who got scammed, who had a sense she was being scammed, but went through the process anyway.
Yeah, I think you're really very emotionally manipulated. So it's really hard for us on the other side of things to say, why did she keep going? But it's really hard to understand unless you've been through it, I think.
So what's the advice here? And obviously you talk to people who deal with these kinds of things every day. Is there a standard piece of advice they can give or do give?
It's really hard. I think one piece of advice is kind of trust your gut. If something feels like a scam, it probably is. But as you mentioned, this woman kind of knew it was a scam and kept going. There are kind of some interesting things that lead to scams that I think people can work on, like loneliness and isolation. I think if you maybe work on being less isolated, that could help you avoid scams. And just really be careful with the technology you're using. If someone calls you saying they're your bank or the government, just don't believe them. I think that's one of the biggest things I learned when reporting the story is you can't really trust anyone is who they say they are if they call you on their phone or email you.
Yeah, you also have a story. We've heard this thing happen here as well, right? Where one woman got a call, I think it was a woman, got a call from someone purporting to be her sister, right? And she could hear her voice and hear her scream and then thought for a minute, oh my God, I have to do something because they were asking for money. And then what did she do? She called her sister to find out she was at home.
Yeah, she used Find my iPhone, I think. But, you have that visceral reaction when you hear someone's voice that you love being in pain, and she very well could have gotten scammed, but she was had the peace of mind to not trust it.
Yeah, and I bring that up, by the way, because you also note, and I wonder how many of us thought of this, but it does kind of make sense. AI, for all that it's good for, is also been a boon for scammers.
That's right. If you think of the Nigerian prince email you used to receive, it's pretty obvious that it was a scam. But now scammers can use AI to write scripts or write emails and really have kind of valid sounding English to make people fall for their scams.
Yeah, I will point out one other thing, and this surprised me. I thought, typically it's boomers who end up being ripped off in these sorts of scams, but you also say Gen Z is much more prone to this.
Yeah, that's right. That surprised me too. I think they're also very online. They're a very online generation. And so perhaps that makes them easier to target. When scammers can find information about you online, that makes their job a little easier because they can call and say, that your grandmother just went on vacation here, and sound like there's someone who knows you or knows someone close to you.
Yeah, and in fact, it's not. They just managed to find a way to do that to make it seem that way. I'm wondering, too, with respect to how many of these people actually get caught and what happens to them. What do we know about that?
Very little of them get punished. I mean, even the ones that get caught, it's often just a slap on the wrist. But so many of them are overseas that it really takes a huge effort of collaboration between governments and law enforcement agencies. I reached out to the Department of Justice in the U.S. and said, what are you doing about this? And, they're trying, but even if they convince foreign governments to work with them to catch some of the scammers, it's really hard to prosecute and hold those people accountable because you have to have the victims testify, and it's just a lot of steps to take. And there's so many people this happens to that they obviously can't do it for everyone.
Yeah, and by the way, with respect to this whole idea of depending on who it happens to, right? It's interesting to note that at some point, people who even know, and you point out you talk about a guy by the name of, I think it was Jim Browning, right? An IT specialist. Mm-hmm. And what did he do? People will love this. What did this guy do because he knew what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, so he's one of these people I call scam baiters. And they basically let scammers contact them and lead them on and pretend that they're falling for the scam so they can get into the computer and, scam the people right back or turn them into authorities or just waste their time. So there's a growing number of people that are doing that and just saying, if the scammers are going to call me and waste my time, I'm going to try and call them and waste their time, or, try to figure out who they are so authorities can go after them.
Does that work? I mean, have there been cases like that? Everyone ever that you know of?
There was one in LA where a scam baiter helped fed law enforcement information that led to the arrest of some foreign nationals in Los Angeles. But I think that's the exception and not the rule. If you look at how much the Department of Justice, for instance, can do, it's not very much, and there aren't very many news releases or press conferences where they catch a lot of scammers.
Yeah, I will point out the one other thing that ties into people who do get scammed. Like, so for example, I think seniors perhaps might fall into that category. When you mention $1 billion lost, that doesn't take into account the fact that many people, I would say most people, if I read the article right, are so embarrassed by this, they don't even report this. So the number is probably much, much higher.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something like only 1/3 of people who are scammed report it, but we don't even know because, they don't report it. But a lot of people think, well, the police aren't going to be able to do anything, so why should I report it and embarrass myself? And, I've talked to a lot of people who are willing to talk to me about the scams they've fallen victim to and then get embarrassed and kind of pull out. So I understand that too.
But just as a last question, do the authorities suggest that if you do think, I mean, the people who don't want to report it for whatever reason, they're embarrassed for whatever it happens to be, is the idea that you should report it to police or the authorities as soon as it happens?
I think so. I mean, I think if you think about enforcement, the more we know that's going on, the more resources we're going to devote towards enforcement. So at the very least, just so police and officials know that there's scamming going on, you don't have to give up personal information about yourself to report it, but it could help lead to a decline.
Yeah, and I think as a rule, you said this earlier on, I think this idea that the government is going to call you on the phone directly to let you know that something is wrong, if that's not a tip-off, I don't know what else would be, but apparently this is still going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Alana, thank you.
I should add, your bank is never going to call you either. You're always going to call them. Yeah. So just know that.
Two things to remember. Alana, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Alana Semuels over at Time Magazine. You can read that article. It's online at time.com.